So we're moving on. Part 10 of the Heartfelt Wholecloth quilt series. I'm Christina Whitney, a studio educator with Handi Quilter. Okay, we're moving on to page 6. We're on step number 10 and we are going to do another wiggle wave line. It's just the same way that we did in part 5. So the only difference is that these lines are going to be a little bit bigger, and so you're going to have to do your math again. So we're going to go from the top to the top and end at the top. And between those different positions is 3 inches. So when I measured my line, some of them were about 11 inches, some were closer to 10.5 inches. So if I were to do 3.5 of these waves, that will give me 10.5 inches, which is pretty close. So like we did in part 5, I might have to do a little bit of arranging, like back and forth, just a little bit, just to make it fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, I've already drawn a chalk line 2 inches from my previous stitched straight line, just as a reference guide there. So I'll line it up with this dashed line that goes through the top. I will stitch 1, 2.5, shift my ruler, 3.5, and I'm going to be shifting the ruler just enough so that I'll end with my half point right on that next line. And then I'll do the same thing going across here to the point where I end on the high part for the end of that line. So I'm just going to stitch one line for right now. Okay, I'm trying to get my needle in position. So I'm lining up the dashed line with my chalk line that I drew, and also lining up with the red line that I've got with my tape. So I've got the needle on the red line, but it's not lining up with my center point. So I'm just going to shift the ruler until the center point lines up with my needle. Just a little bit more there. And that's where I'm going to want to start stitching. Okay, I'm going to check again, make sure I'm still lined up. Lining up, going across. We're going to start stitching. I'm going to stop at my needle stop position right there. So that line there. And you can't see that line. Let's shift it over. That needle stop line. I'm going to shift the ruler. Okay, hopefully you can see, but I'm about 1/4 inch off. So as I do this last part, and I probably should have started this from the very beginning, just spacing them out just a tiny bit. So I'm going to take maybe an extra stitch here at the bottom and then an extra stitch at the top, and just slowly shifting the ruler over as I go until I get to the point where my middle line is lined up perfectly with my centering tape. Okay? So let's go ahead and work on that. So little movements. Okay, so I stopped right lined up, and on this next section I'm going to go ahead and take an extra stitch at each bottom point and each top point, just to lengthen it out a little bit rather than waiting till the very last section to do that. So just a little shift there, and another little one. So you probably can't even see that I'm shifting it. And going across, I can tell I'm going to need to shift it even a little bit more than I have been. So with that shifting, I was able to get that lined up right where my line was. Since these sections are getting so big, I'm just going to do a little bit at a time, and I will be advancing the fabric back and forth as I go. But let's continue on around to the next side. So I'm going to line up my center point, bumped up against my hopping foot, line up the dotted line on my chalk mark. Okay, stopping at the needle down and shifting over. And my center point is pretty close. I just need to shift just a tiny bit. Great. I'm going to stop there and go ahead and shift in the bottom position. Now this side, you'll notice I'm going to go off the edge, so I don't really have to worry so much about shifting and getting things right to the exact measurement. So you'll notice that we went off the edge of the quilt, and depending on which direction you oriented yours, you might go off at the top and bottom, or you might go off the sides on the left and right. So I need to do my top left-hand corner, and it's going to go off of the edge here. So rather than trying to line things up going left to right, which we normally do, I'm going to start up in the right-hand corner, up by where my foot is already, and I'm going to work my way down to the left, just so that it's easier to keep things lined up, and then I can go off the edge of the quilt and not have to worry about anything over on that side. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, I went ahead and put the needle down in the same spot where I started the line, that the wiggle wave that went across, so that my lines will connect. I've lined up my middle with my foot, my needle, and the dashed lines with my chalk line. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch. Okay, I stopped in the high point. I'm going to go ahead and shift my ruler over, matching up the high point. And my low point is quite a bit off on this side. So I've got a couple options here. If I was going to connect on with another side, I would probably wiggle it over. So I can go ahead and wiggle it a little bit, but I also have the option of just letting it go because it's going to go off the side of the quilt. So it might not really matter too much in the long run. But I am going to go ahead and shift it just a little bit as I go along. So I'm pretty close to getting it lined up there. Okay, look at that, center point right on the tape line. Since I'm stopped, I'm going to go ahead and shift my ruler at this point. I was at a low point, so I'm going to go to the low, lining up along my chalk line and ready to go. Okay, that was the first 3 sides of the wiggle wave. I'm going to go ahead and do an echo now, a 1/2 inch echo. and go around the top, and then I'll go back and do the bottom. Now with this echo, we're going to have to be kind of careful because we were shifting the ruler. So we want to try to keep it as close as we can, lined up with our stitch line. So I'm going to go ahead and line this side up so that the stitch line is on the edge of the ruler. And as I'm going, it's going to be hard for you to see because this thread's getting pretty dark and the fabric's getting pretty dark. But I'm going to go ahead and shift the ruler, trying to always keep the ruler about the same positioning as the previous stitch line. Okay, so you can tell it's not perfect, but it gives you that look that we're going for. So I'm going to continue going around the rest of that. In step 12, we are told to use the half carat diamond to stitch a partial diamond in each of these sections here. But if you look at the drawing, the lines are perpendicular to the hexagon shape. So I'm going to draw a line here and draw one on the other side. They're at a 90-degree angle. Well, that was kind of crooked. Okay, but then when I put my diamond ruler in, it's not the same angle. So I'm going to actually use my straight edge, stitch that line, turn it, stitch that line, and then I will come back in with my half carat diamond template and use that kind of to do the small diamond on the inside. Okay, coming right into that point. Okay, pull that tape off. Now you can either tie off here, or you can actually just stitch right back down. Use that as a travel line if you don't mind having some overstitching. We're going to change to the half carat diamond. I'm going to bump it right up into there. We're going to kind of work how we did with the diamonds that we did down here. I'm just going to shift the ruler just a little bit so that you can see where it lines up. So hopefully that glare will be a little less for you. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch one side. I'm going to shift the ruler down. And I'm actually going to shift it so that this top point is lined up with my red line. I'm going to stitch up to the red line. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to move the ruler out of the way, and I'm going to free motion a circle. Bringing the ruler back into position, stitching down. Making sure I've got my 1/4 of an inch away from that side so that I can get back into that point. Okay, so now I've got the diamond shape with a somewhat circle at the top, and I will finish doing the other sides. Thank you for joining me for part 10 of the Heartfelt Wholecloth Quilt series.